All right. Hello, welcome everyone. Welcome to the Orthodox Christian Attorney Network's webinar today on Building Up the Church, a conversation on funding the future of Orthodox Church growth. My name is Deacon Ken Liu. I'm the Executive Director of OCAN, and we are a ministry dedicated to fostering the fellowship and spiritual growth of Orthodox attorneys, training attorneys to serve the Orthodox Church, and impacting our communities with the love of Christ. And we would be grateful if you could help spread the news about OCAN to any attorneys that you know. I'm very excited to have this conversation today with Father Athanasius Kone. It's been a very encouraging few years to see the significant growth in Orthodox parishes and the proliferation of online Orthodoxy notwithstanding. That is not the real church. As an incarnational faith, Orthodox Christianity believes in the importance of physical space. The Eucharist and all of our sacramental mysteries take place in God's midst in our temples. And so it is a sacred space where we come together in fellowship to worship with our brothers and sisters. And now, with so many parishes struggling with an influx of new inquirers, new catechumens, new members, we are struggling. And without enough space to accommodate all those who want to worship with us, we're constrained in our ability to offer the full life of the church to all those whom God is calling to his body. And so I believe this ministry, the Orthodox Church Capital Improvement Fund, or OCCIF, really plays a crucial role in literally building up the future of the Orthodox Church. And so I'm thrilled to have with us today Father Athanasius, who is the executive director of OCCIF, as well as the head priest at St. Innocent Orthodox Church in Eureka, California. He was also previously a priest at Holy Theotokos of Iberon in Kailua, Hawaii, hardship post, I'm sure. And before becoming a priest, Father Athanasius was an economist for the state of Washington. If you have questions for Father Athanasius during this talk, feel free to put them in the chat room, the chat box, and we'll try to get to them as we go along. So, Father, thank you so much for joining us. I'm thrilled to have you here today. So not many priests were economists. I'd love to hear a little briefly about your journey, your prior career, and how you became Orthodox, how you became a priest, and what led you to OCCIF.
Thank you very much for having me. It's very nice to be able to talk with you and to communicate about all the things that are going on. I will start talking about myself, which is always my thing I want to do the least, to be honest. But I will do it because it's an unusual journey into the church, as most people's journeys are unusual, but mine's extremely unusual. Um, I was living and up in Alaska, in Kodiak, Alaska, and my wife at the time, we were, even though she's from Alaska and she is part Aleut, part Russian, her family, over time had migrated into Protestantism, and we met in the church. I was, studying to be a Protestant pastor, and I had gone up to do an internship in Kodiak, where she was born and raised, and we were working up there, and I was very actually traveling around to all the villages and pretty devout in terms of my life. So I wasn't encountering Orthodoxy wasn't like a love at first sight. It was really in not a good state, and not in a way that was reflecting of where the church really is. You have the oldest churches in the United States up in Alaska, literally empty up on a bluff looking over a river. It's 200-year-old church, and it's kind of just an empty shell. So it's hard to see the fullness of the church in those pictures. But a long story. I was working for the tribes, and I had an encounter with St. Herman on Monk's Lagoon with my wife at the same time, where we were walking up the path, and this very warm wind with a myrrh smell just started circling around us multiple times. And this certainly catches your attention. Even no matter what you believe, you go to Moxagoon, and it's holy forest. It doesn't feel like a normal forest. In Hawaii, they say it gives you chicken skin. Your skin stands up, and this even more made our got our attention. And certainly my wife was healed that day drinking water from the spring. I mean, it's just like one thing after another was happening, and we didn't really know how to equate it and what was going on. So I just kind of tell people it was like I'm a cat. God just grabbed me by the back and the scruff of the neck and just decided to get my attention. And even all that, it didn't really get all the attention. So to make a very long and complicated story, about a month later, I actually had a dream, and not knowing anything about Orthodoxy, this monk comes walking towards me with this beard, and and tells me his name is Father Seraphim Rose. And I had never heard this name, never made, and had no way to even equate it, and starts telling me about my life, and very luminous being, I might add. And this is and tells me I'll become Orthodox, tells me things about my life, and then tells me I'll become an Orthodox priest. And I wake up, and I tell him, no, I'm not going to wear that stupid black hat. I'm really not very humble, so this is my response. And but I wake up and I'm covered in tears because in the dream I was crying when this was happening. So it shook me, honestly, and I ran to go talk to a priest and said I was going crazy, and he's like, welcome to the club. It's Alaska, everybody's crazy. But it just started a long interrupted life where I got brought into the church in a very unusual way. And
Mhm.
when I was in Alaska, I was working for the tribes doing economic and community development. And it had kind of taken my studies in economics, and but we left Alaska. This was time, it was very tumultuous times when we were there. And so we came down to the state of Washington, and we were moving to a rural area where we kind of felt into a very healthy parish and very small town. But I ended up becoming an economist for the state of Washington as a result of this. And I really loved being an economist. You don't want to sit next to me at a party. I'm a recovering economist, so I'm literally the most boring person to talk to. Don't get stuck sitting next to me. But it comes in handy. If economics, when it's best used, it just kind of tells you why things are happening. It's the ability to explain the why underneath all the tumultuous noise and signals, and recognize patterns, and explain this is what's going on. And it's really helpful when you're trying to do what we're doing now with the Orthodox Church Capital Improvement Fund, OCCIF, which is honestly probably one of the worst names ever made. When my young son heard it, he thought we were talking about a Russian oligarch, Uncle Osif. It's not a good name. So, but it really helps us to understand how are we going to start solving the problem, which isn't that we want to create a bank. It's not that we want to make money. It's that we want to use capital to build churches. We want to make sure that churches get built. We're not after, you know, doing things in a way that shows a great profit, or also we don't want to do things that shows a loss, and doesn't follow our fiduciary duties to make a sustainable nonprofit. But we really want to focus on building churches and using capital, using money as a utility, a tool to do that, not to get married to the money, but get married to the mission, which is we are so underdeveloped in terms of the presence of Orthodoxy in America in a way that's sustainable. We want it to be, we want to build churches, but never put it out there where it's not a sustainable and a very good fit for the people. And we don't want to loan money out to somebody and have them unable to pay it. We don't want to do any of these kind of things. So we're trying to build a purpose-built institution that will be around 30 years from now, with a very large amount of capital that can continuously build churches in the United States for a long, long time, and put in everything in place that protects that from being taken off of that mission, and make sure it's just done, and done well, and done with transparency and clarity and purpose. So that's the goal.
Amen. Well, I think God must have known that Orthodox world would need an economist who's also a priest. So many priests go to seminary, and I'm sure you don't have any economics or finance classes in seminary. And so when you get to running a parish, it's not easy to deal with these money issues, and we think it's not spiritual, but yet money is important. Without funds, we don't get things done. And to have someone who is both a priest and an economist at the head of this organization, I think is perfect. And so we'd love to hear a little bit more about, in a nutshell, what exactly does OCCIF do? I think very few people have probably heard of it, or if you've heard of it, might not know much about it. Can you tell us a little bit about what it does, and how did the idea of OCCIF come about in the first place?
Yeah, let's start with how it came about. I believe the problem, as you guys know, is that churches need to be built. They usually will do something that is in their power to raise money to build a new property or to build a new building, and they'll raise typically somewhere between 40 and 60% of the total amount of money needed to do this project. And then they run out of steam, they run out of time, and they need to get something done now because they have, a building that's overfull of people, and they'll need to a lot of times borrow or get somebody to give that 40%, that last 40%, but they've run out of just energy. And OSIF is typically the place where people are going to get that last 40%. And the reason they're not going to banks is banks, especially in smaller rural areas or different states, it just depends, outside of urban areas, they're very hesitant to loan money to churches because they don't want to have to foreclose on a church and get the bad PR. And they can't understand a business model of a typical church very well. But when you show up with an Orthodox business plan and money, they just look at you, and you show up wearing a cassock. It's even more difficult at times to get loans. And so the Diocese of the West in the Orthodox Church of America, I think, was just frustrated, and they couldn't get some of their projects funded in some of the rural areas. So they had a man start a nonprofit, kind of get some CPAs together, get different people, and they started doing loans. They started taking um, money in, not just asking for donations, but they would take money in from investors, pay them a very, small amount of interest, and then they would loan it out to the churches, and kind of became the middleman. And that's been going on since 2014. About a year and a half ago, the OSIF received a large amount of capital, and it allowed them to fund many churches, and they were having a hard time doing it and scaling up with volunteers, to be honest. It was just, and the board was really an operational board, and boards, now our board is more of providing direction and prioritization, and we have hired operations. So in the last year, we've hired an executive director and an admin assistant who's this young Russian lady who doesn't take no for an answer, and everything has been automated as much as we can. Our operational tempo is just humming along. We hired a loan officer. We rewrote the way that we do underwriting, and we have a chief financial officer, Father Michael Tassos, who started here in July. So I think our ability to be responsive and to take on new challenges and to respond and to take capital and get it out the door is fantastic. So I think right now, for every $2 million that comes through OSIP, we're seeing 4 churches built,
Mm.
which is right away. 4 churches that are able to take an action and go from that fundraising phase, that dream phase, that running out of momentum phase, to getting the project with shovels in the ground and getting people in the door and worshiping in an Orthodox church. And
Mm.
I think that's a very good thing for us to be able to see.
Yeah, that's wonderful here. Can you tell us about kind of the national landscape? How, how are parishes struggling with accommodating their growth? Is this a problem across the country, not being able to find enough financing?
Yeah. Right now in our funnel of needs that are people just coming to us alone that we know of, and loans of the size that we can fund, not the big projects like San Diego or Atlanta or some of the big urban centers like Houston where there's just massive big $6 million projects in the making. We have $20 million in projects right now in our queue that we can't fully fund, that we're trying to raise money to just cover, the greatest needs. But $20 million of well qualified projects that we have set through a strict underwriting process done by commercial bankers who are volunteers, and now a loan officer who's navigating it's like herding cats to underwrite a loan. $20 million, and we've already deployed $2 million this year. We just can't keep. We're desperate for capital, and we're trying to get the word out because especially in certain parts of the country, the West Coast, the dioceses of the South, Texas, all the way to North Carolina, are just really they're seeing such an immense amount of growth that they're trying to figure out how are they going to respond, and their buildings are not adequate. And we are trying to figure out a way to make this happen at a greater scale and a greater speed. But right now we are desperate to communicate the need because that's just the churches that we have in our queue. We know that there's other churches that aren't even calling us just because they're having to go to banks and to apply for loans, and they're not getting the most favorable terms, and it makes it less likely that they're going to get anything done in the next couple of years because they just don't have the quality of underwriting review that is needed for a commercial loan that is typical for a business. It's just not quite there yet.
Can you tell us more about that? What do you mean by not quality?
Um, just when a bank looks at a business, they want to see things that they understand. They want profits and they want money coming in. They want things that you sell. They look at a church's books and they go, I don't understand it. You get 60% of your money in January and December, and the rest of the year you're basically starving to death. You pay a priest and you sell candles. What? I don't understand how your business works. And they just have a hard time translating it. And then if the church is so big that they're asking for a $3 or $4 million loan, they certainly can show that they can do it, but the rates are much higher. OCCIF is able to charge. I shouldn't say charge, but we are. And let me say it this way: OCCIF has. We are trying to stay reasonable in any kind of interest that we have to charge to kind of maintain this model. And what we've come up with is an internal model inside everything that is a set point. And we're just saying, as long as we can have this margin inside how we operate, whether our interest rates go up or down, if we can maintain this simple interest rate, we can make a sustainable enterprise for a long, long period of time. And it's given us a great stability. So we're not trying to guess where the market's going. We're not trying to offer rates and become competitive like a bank. We're just saying, here's our internal interest that we have to kind of keep a flow going through to make sure the people who are investing with OCCIF and the people who are borrowing from OCCIF are always protected. And we're going to operate using this simple margin. And
So
that's
your
kind of
rates are lower than banks, you're saying?
much lower. Yeah, much lower
Can you tell
typically.
us the comparison?
Yeah, like right now, it depends on where you're at. And obviously, banking is regional, but we're typically doing loans somewhere in the 6 to 6.5%, depending on how the money comes to for us. We typically are paying investors 4%. So we're using that 2%, which is we're not making a lot of money on that because we cover all the costs, all the operations over the life of the loan, all the risk. Um, we're maintaining a steady pace with that kind of model. If you go to a bank and you ask for a commercial loan with an unproven kind of history, and you're a new parish that just has blown up, you're going to be looking at paying somewhere over 7 to 8%. We're getting, and in Houston, you can get it quite low because it's just there's so much money. But in Alaska, you're looking at 8.5%. It just depends on where you are in the country. Money is not always priced the same.
Mhm.
But as a
But I
result,
assume,
yeah, go ahead.
oh, so I assume though that you, of course, still want to make sure that your borrowers will be able to pay it back. So what is your application process like, and how does it compare to a bank? I assume you still have some rigorous standards.
We have more than rigorous standards than a typical residential mortgage. They tend to look at, how much money do you have, how much money do you have to pay out. We are actually having conversations, and one of the things that OCCIF is doing is we're having conversations continuously with parish councils and people, because a parish council has never done anything like banding together, committing to making a leap of faith and borrowing money and doing this with a priest who is, most likely, most priests are adverse to taking risk. And so we're constantly helping parish councils and coming into meetings and saying, here's what you can ask for, here's what is normal, here's the normal flow of how a deal is set up and structured. We're providing all this for free as a ministry. We're helping settle the priest down and the treasurer at the parish and saying, you guys raised 60%, you got to borrow 40%, you're going to pay this. And here's the things you have to watch out for. We're putting it together as a package. We're meeting with people
Mm.
2 or 3 times via Zoom for no cost. We're not making any type of income doing this. We're just doing it as a ministry because it's so hard for a group
Mm.
who've come together in a parish council to make this kind of jump. They've never done anything like it before.
Wow.
Um,
And so it sounds like it's much less adversarial process where you're actually walking parishes through the process and explaining things and not just trying to decide whether to, approve or disapprove the loan.
Correct. So we keep saying, look, we're not looking for customers. We're looking for partners. We're looking for
Mm.
ways for parishes that have money when they're saving up to do a new project to put the money with us so we can deploy it to build other churches. You have $1 million, you have a $2 million project, you have $1 million sitting in your local bank. We're saying, come bring it to OCCIF. We'll invest it to build these other projects while you do that last year of fundraising. And then when you're ready, we'll deploy your money and we'll raise more money and we'll get your project out the door. And we're really trying to say, look, the Orthodox world needs a partnership so that people can put their money in something safe and deploy it to build churches. And they also need things that help them learn what are the normal steps so that we are not putting them out just to kind of invent things again. We're saying, here's what parishes do, here's the steps you have to have. And it's really been helpful and increased the amount of people that we can get um, into new churches, into new
Mm.
properties, into new things. And I think that's what we're really trying to build OCCIF into, is a partner that people can
Mm.
trust and that can help them accomplish the goal. Remember, isn't to make money, it's to build churches. Where our goal is to
Mm.
build churches, and as a result, we're trying to keep the cost is cost effective. We have underwriting that takes into things that a bank would never. We track things like how many people in the parish give, how many people are taking on the burden of a 15-year loan to pay back this. Divide that out by how many givers that you have. Typically, how much is your attendance now? We know when you have space, your attendance is going to grow, and you can kind of project out that more income is going to come. We can kind of use some of our modeling to help people know what that's normal. We do things like now insisting that people are paying a priest. We're not going to give a loan out to a parish that doesn't pay a priest because it's not
Mm.
sustainable. It's not likely that your parishes don't survive without priests.
Mm. Amen. Yeah. Wow. I love the process, so that I'm sure a lot of priests and parish council members who have never handled these kinds of projects must feel a lot more sense of comfort that you're really trying to help them and trying to be a partner.
Our loan officer, who is a priest, he is getting a PhD, and he is using OSIF, moving from being on a bank model to becoming a partner model, and using all the steps that it takes to help a parish
Mm.
to get things done. And he's using that part of this process actually to write his dissertation, because he's
Oh,
gone through the
wow.
process himself. And so he's
Mm.
documenting and trying to come up with manuals that we can begin to hand people and saying, it's not, a recipe, but here's the steps that you have to watch out for. And we're hoping to produce this document that we can give to churches for free down in the
Oh,
future
great.
and really help people to become more aware, more concrete, and more effective of, reducing the risk. And everything, honestly, this is the most important thing I'll say. This is being an economist. We're doing everything we can to reduce risk in every way we can so that there's less risk in everything that we do. And it's always about just the mediation of risk. And we can't guarantee that something doesn't go wrong, but we can always take anything that's risky and we can do what we can to make sure that if it's less risky than it could be otherwise.
Uh, have any churches ever defaulted?
No churches have defaulted. We have never had a missed payment, except for the exception when the treasurer at the local church changes over. Sometimes the bank doesn't get the right signer and they won't let the person write the check on time. And we've had two late checks, but it's only because the treasurers, the banks are so rigorous about, looking at the parish board minutes and then making the new signer. And it's so clunky that we've had two late checks because of that, but we've never had a missed payment.
Wow. Can you
Yeah.
give us an example of a success story? I'm sure
Yeah,
you've
look
had
at
many of them, right?
yeah, my own parish. I mean, I learned about OCCIF because I was in Hawaii at the parish where the Theotokos of Iveron, the icon that
The
from
Merstrian
Hawaii, the
icon.
Mercury icon, yeah. And we had when I got there, I came from Greece to Hawaii. If you could imagine, I was being punished by God for not liking nice weather. I guess I don't know what to tell you, but I came to the parish there in Hawaii, and it was a small storefront. It had never been successful in even paying a priest part time or it was in a having a hard time paying the rent, even though they have a world renowned streaming icon. And we went to a point where they started paying the priests part time and then a full time salary for the priest. And then Hawaii is astronomically expensive to buy anything. Just to buy an old church, when we finally found one that was for sale, it was $2 million. And we raised $1 million when we finally had something to do, and we still couldn't get a bank to do a loan for us. We could not get a bank, even with half of the money and a property. We could not get a bank. They did not, the word whatever, the Russian Orthodox Church or whatever you want to say, just wasn't something they were willing to step into. And so we started scrambling for a source of funding, and we discovered, the Orthodox Church Capital Improvement Fund, and they took on the raising of the money to do their biggest loan at the time, a $1,900,000 loan to this church in Hawaii. And the success story is that we got the loan, we got it paid. The church now, it just happened to be 5 years this May of when the process started. And I'm no longer there, but they paid off the loan. They paid off the $900,000 loan in 5 years, and they have now owned the building outright. It's probably one of the bigger parishes in the Diocese of the West and Rocor. We went from nothing in 7 years to having a church that was purchased, and now 12 years later they own the church building outright. That's a serious success story, and
Amen. That's so cool
yeah.
to hear. Can you tell us what kinds of projects does OCCIF fund? Is it just building projects? Do you fund mortgages or small, large projects?
Well, our bylaws are a little bit loose here. We fund canonical Orthodox Church projects, so remodels, refinances, church purchases, land purchases, and right now that's our main source. But honestly, most of the things that we're doing is helping a church purchase land or
Mm,
church purchase buildings. We are in the process of doing one refinance right now that's being used to do construction of a bell tower, about $250,000 to just have somebody redo their bell tower. But yeah, most of the time it's purchasing of land and purchasing of buildings and or building the getting them out that you need to do the construction.
mm, okay. Can
Our
you?
portfolio is about at this moment we have about $6 million out in loans, and we have we're building two more loans, so we're building capital to fund these two other loans, which are so we're in the process. So we have about $8 million. Where our goal this year is to get to $10 million of capital, and we keep a percentage of our active portfolio liquid at all times in case of emergencies.
Mhm.
You can't never have too much liquidity when something goes wrong. So we have a policy of keeping 10% of our portfolio liquid, and making a small amount of interest in other things besides loans. But that's not because we're trying to make a profit and do investments. We're just trying to make sure that we always have a liquidity when something goes wrong or an emergency happens, that we don't have any, like I said, we're de-risking any type of thing that can go wrong. And we're always ready to be able to jump in if we can.
Oh, of course, and you need to be financially sound yourself too.
Yeah. Yeah, we're doing everything we can to use, people in the Orthodox Church who have expertise. They don't always want to be on your board, but you can form a committee, an informal committee, and get their expertise. And we have some very talented people with interest in managing the money and private equity with the experience that we use. We have people that are doing loan underwriting. We have 3 commercial bankers that overview all our loans and approve them before they go into the board of directors. So there's checks on every process. But we also now are getting decisions about loans probably within 2 weeks of getting an application, which before
Wow,
that was not something that was happening. So we're in conversations. Usually, when somebody applies, there's steps. They're not always ready to actually apply for the loan. So we're providing that consultative expertise to help them get moving and tell them what's normal, what's not normal. But we're responding to people within a week.
that's amazing. Hmm.
Yeah.
And what's the scope of churches that you fund all over the country,
Yeah.
small, large jurisdictions?
Um, It's across the country. To be honest, most of the people requesting funding, though, right now tend to skew to the west and to the south of the United States. Most of the growth in churches that maybe are undersized and then maybe an influx of new people seem to be in those areas where I mean, I think I counted this spring, just informal in my own head, just asking different people how many people they were baptizing. There was probably over 2,500 people baptized on the West Coast this year during Lent from the different jurisdictions, and that's putting pressure on every kind of building you can imagine. And we're seeing people who get a loan, get a new building, and it's full pretty fast. Especially in urban areas where it's just so costly to build anything in an urban area right now in the United States. It's so difficult to aggregate enough capital and get through all the hoops. So, but yeah, we're multi any jurisdiction that's canonical, and we are mostly seeing the demand in the West Coast and the South.
That makes sense. Yeah. Um, and how, if one of our listeners wants to get started, what's the process for getting started with you?
Well, right now, the easiest thing is to just call, chat with us. We have people that will call and just talk with you, and then we'll find out if you're in a good space to put in an application. We Right now we're just using the most simple thing we can. We just here's a button to a Google form, fill it out, and we'll get back to you. And you fill in all the little details of your budget for the last 3 years, how many people you have, where you're at, location, jurisdiction, and phone number, who to contact, and we'll set up a Zoom meeting and with you, and then we'll set up a Zoom meeting with your parish council and kind of take it from there. We're It's not always the most flashy to not have a website that you can do a form, but we're just trying to keep our costs so effective, and we just found that a Google form is extremely flexible, and it allows us to keep really on the mission. So we're using it. It's a free technology, and it just gets the job done, and we're using it for everything we can.
Mm.
To try not to touch things more than once is our philosophy. We just want to do things once, not do it, have input the data once and then have another person. And we're trying to automate every business thing that we can, so that we can take advantage of, all the most efficient way to do things.
And what's the range of size of loans that you give?
Um, we go down right now. We have some loans that are as small as 100,000. We can go up to. There's no limit in how big we could go, technically speaking, but we have never done a loan bigger than $1 million. And you try to not let your portfolio get oversized by one entity. And right now, our sweet spot is probably the way that most churches, because they can raise a certain amount of money to get the project done themselves, but they always need that last 40%. That sweet spot is somewhere between 300,000 and a million. That's kind of the spot that most churches really want to borrow money, because when you get over $1 million and you start having to pay that on a monthly basis, it gets to be difficult for the average parish to kind of keep the cost. So that's kind of where you find that, most parishes have 100 and 20 people to 200 people coming on a Sunday that are doing projects. That's kind of the sweet spot for them, and they're usually borrowing about 300 to 600,000, and that makes it so they can still pay the priest and not have, they might have a $4,000 payment to cover the cost of their loan. That's kind of where most things end up being really. When you start having to pay $10,000 a month, to cover the cost of the loan, it's a burden on the parish.
Mhm.
And we're not against putting together any kind of deal we can, but we don't want to see parishes, get crushed by, so much payments that they, all of a sudden they have to start cutting corners in other areas. So we
Right.
try to,
Yeah. So you help them to be wise about what they're able to take on.
yeah. Yeah, and there's ratios in banking that you use to kind of say how much money extra do you have after all the bills are paid to make sure you can cover these things, and we use that in our underwriting. And we're very transparent with the people, that here's, so we have 5 criterias that we use in underwriting that track things like, your how much money you have, how much people you have, how much giving, how much, future revenue is going to be. It's boring stuff, but there's formulas to say over 5 years how much the money is really worth over 5 years time.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And so I hope that some of our listeners feel drawn
Mhm.
to your ministry, not just for taking out loans, but for supporting. What I assume you take donations. What do you do with donations? You just if you can explain that process.
Well, yeah, no, this is a great question. We right now um, have got OCCIF to the point where it's not falling behind and needing donations to be sustainable.
Mm.
Or in the past, to be honest, donations was making OCCIF a functional entity, a true nonprofit. By using some internal measurements of margin, that we just kind of make every decision based on keeping that really tight 1.5% margin on everything we do, and having a reason why we make decisions that's based on that. It's allowed us to be at a very clean break even point. So now that when we get donations, we are using them to do new loans, to fund things, not to keep and cover our operations, which to me is the best
Mm.
thing we can do. It's just sustainable. So if we got $500,000, we would literally, within probably the next 60 days, have that deployed in 2 loans out the door, for waiting projects that we would just be able to fund and just, help them get everything ready and out the door. And
Mm. I imagine the
that
demand is so great right now that you'd love to have influx of funds.
Yeah, it would be the greatest problem, to be honest, because right now our problem is that we're so undercapitalized for the demand, and this is just the demand we know about. If people knew that there was actually somebody funding stuff, we'd probably get inundated with new applications. But there's so many small parishes that can't get to that next stage. There's too many parishes in storefronts that can't get to that next stage. And so right now we're trying to, you know, get money out the door to cover these growing parishes that need to have some help to get to the next stage where they're more sustainable themselves. And we would deploy the money probably like that. We don't have any tricky projects, or we wouldn't set it into marketing. We're probably the to be honest, we need to do better at marketing. We're starting to come out with some new things. We have some people who are volunteering and helping us do some marketing, but we were hesitant to do too much marketing the first year and a half because we wanted to have the substance behind it, so that if somebody did give us $2 million, we wouldn't be fumbling. I mean, I could tell you that that money would be deployed in the next 45 days. And it's not that we couldn't deploy it faster. It just takes churches that long to get themselves organized. They're not
Yeah.
fast, they just take some time to get together a parish council meeting.
So everyone listening, please help get the word out about OCCIF. Uh, Now, one thing that I found really fascinating was that not only do you take donations, but you actually take investments. So
Yeah.
that if someone wanted to give a large chunk of money, but not ready to, make an outright donation, they can actually invest with OCCIF and get interest back. Can you explain that process?
Yeah, so we use a community investment note. It's a kind of a well-established thing in impact investments. It's a promissory note between OCCIF and the person who's doing the investment, and it's time-based. So the longer you give us your money, the more interest we'll pay. So, like if you're doing it for a year, which we do now, we didn't used to do this in the past, by the way. We only did a 5-year investment. And now, if you give OCCIF money, we'll pay you back the interest on the money for the time you say that we can use the money. And at the end of the time, we'll give you back all of the principal. And we use that money to build and aggregate money for projects then that we will deploy to churches that are kind of in a queue. And if you give us money that says, I want to give you money, but I want to use it for this specific project, we will actually take money now for specific projects and help
Mm,
you to build. If because they're just, we're not being overly subjective, and just we're allowing people to give it with more purpose now. And this is also trying to do everything we can to make it easier for people to invest their money with us. We will do a simple promissory note giving instructions to wire the money. We pay twice a year, so we'll send interest payments back to you at the set rate of whatever the interest rate is. Typically, if it's a longer term investment, it's 4%. If it's shorter than 5 years, it goes from 3 up to 4%, kind of each amount of time it gets, if so if you give it for 3 years, it's 3.5% or 3.75. We're trying to be as flexible as we can to take on money short term and long term, and we're
mm,
paying out the interest due back to you twice a year. And we have never defaulted on our own payments back to investors. We keep very to me, we're doing a very good job of risk management, and keeping the duties that we have fiduciary to not take someone's hard-earned money and to not give it back to them.
mm.
So this is something that we are using to fund these loans. Now, 4% is not a great rate of return. It's not going to make you excited. You're not going to, unless you put in a lot of money, you're not going to be
That's
able
higher
to.
than most bank accounts right now.
It is higher than most bank accounts. We're not trying to set the market to be a great source of investment. We're not trying to, we are, if you give money to OCCIF, it's a ministry that builds churches.
So it's really a win-win situation. You are investing in a wonderful organization, helping out a church, and still getting a return back. Uh,
Yes.
what's not
It's
to
the
love about
best.
that?
It's the best thing we can do, but you're not. I mean, you could get money in other kinds of investments and make a much better state of return, but you cannot build a church. You might be building things that you don't. Unfortunately, your money gets used for all sorts of things. We are only, and I mean only, using the money to build churches.
Amen. So if someone wanted to make that kind of investment, they just call you up as well.
Yeah, yeah. Please, we're desperate for money, and I mean, the demand is phenomenal, and these windows of opportunity, they don't last forever. How long this influx will go on, and how long we'll be able to build churches, and how long that what the future holds is unknown. I can tell you, only thing I can tell you about the future is I'm going to be bad at predicting it.
Even as an
Honestly,
economist.
yeah, that's the only thing I can guarantee you.
Oh, and just to be clear, you said that you actually take investment in specific projects. So that means if a listener is in a parish that needs a loan, they can invest in OCCIF to give a loan to their own parish.
And we
You
would
be
do
a
what we would
middleman
yes.
administrator.
So what we would do is why we would aggregate capital for that specific parish that has it. We can, a lot of times we're trying to do what we're calling more of a self-funded model. Back in the 80s, they called these church bonds. They were big in like Texas, but we're trying to say, okay, the parish, we don't have the money outside of your area to fund this loan. But if you guys wanted to get, 8 people that could put $100,000 in, and for 5 years, and you had a need for $1 million, we could come up with the $200,000 and you get the aggregate that 800,000, give your parish $1 million loan. The people who are doing it don't have, nobody knows they've done it, and we will be the safe middle person, the entity in between that manages all of the risk, manages the payments, manages all the underwriting and all the title obligations, and allows that church to get off the ground. And then 5 years we can refinance with different terms and get everybody their money back and get them out of it. But we can make sure they get their principal back and even earn some interest. If they want to donate the interest to the parish or something, that's up to them. But we're able to do that kind of thing as well to help parishes get deals done so they can stop being stuck.
That's wonderful to hear. Uh, well, we have a little over 10 minutes left. I'd love to open up the floor to our audience here. If anyone would like to ask Father Athanasius a question, feel free to enter it in the chat box, or we can, if you want to raise your virtual hand, we can actually open up the mics as well, however you'd like to do it. Well, while we're waiting, do you have any thoughts you'd like to share that I did not ask you about, Father?
No, I mean, this is a good starting spot. I think if people are interested, just we want partners. We don't want customers. I mean that we're not trying to make, we're not trying to be a credit union. We're trying to get partners and figure out how to build churches. That's the goal.
Amen. I had a question in the chat box earlier. How does OCCIF help mission parishes who may not yet be financeable?
We had a donor who gave us some money to use for this exact thing. He's like, I don't want you to fund the parishes that are building a cathedral. I don't want to fund, I want to fund those little teeny parishes that can't do it on their own. Are you willing to do it? And we said, yes, even if they don't make it, we're willing to do something. And we took in a donation to do this. Unfortunately, whoever this person, there's too many parishes with this kind of need. We've tried to work. We've worked with like a parish up in Arkansas. We worked with the parish, missions. We're working with one actually in Texas right now to try to get off the ground and what we can do and be realistic about what they can pay and what they can't pay. Yeah, we're absolutely. This is our goal is to get those storefronts, not in a renting, but get them some sort of ownership and with enough parking so the church can grow. In Texas, if you don't have parking, your church doesn't grow. It's just like a function of, parking lot is the size of your church. I mean, it's kind of funny, but if you don't have a parking lot, you're not going to make it very well.
Right. Any other questions? If not, really appreciate your time, Father. This is just a wonderful ministry. I hope all of our listeners will spread the word out to your diocese, to your bishops, so they know about this. And please donate and invest in OCCIF. I love the fact that this even exists. You're literally building up the future of the Orthodox Church.
That's our goal. Ken, thank you for having me. Our goal is that we have a self-funding mechanism that is really has access to capital that doesn't have to take investments into the future, that can build churches for the next 100 years, in the United States. And it uses very solid risk management and, with integrity, to make that the mission. That's the goal.
And thanks to all of you listeners out there. And we are glad to have so many people listening today who are not lawyers or not our regular audience, but please help us get the word out about OCAN, the Orthodox Christian Attorney Network. We are here to be a ministry to attorneys, but also to encourage attorneys to minister and support churches and dioceses with their legal skills. So we hope to be a win-win situation, just like OCCIF does as well. All right. Thank you very much, Father. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.